So here we are, reviewing some of the latest Detroit Red Wings news and discourse, courtesy of everybody's favorite NHL insider, Elliotte Friedman, on the recent 32 Thoughts podcast, who had a number of things to say and a number of talking points that we also need to dive into here. So, let's just dive into it here. NHL Watcher posted a bunch of tweets, Elliotte Friedman's updates on the Red Wings and their Steve Yzerman-less era heading into 2026-2027. Here is what I wanted to start out with. Friedman said on the podcast, initially, I thought that maybe Steve Yzerman resigned. I don't believe that was the case. I believe the Red Wings made the choice to move on. I think the biggest thing is I think the Wings have been shocked and surprised at getting people to want to play for them or be there. I think that's a very big part of this. Explain to us how we can get back to being the Red Wings again, where people want to play for us. Now, that's a pretty interesting comment, and I don't want to make it seem like Friedman is pointing all fingers at Steve Yzerman and saying, oh yeah, players don't want to play in Detroit because Yzerman is the GM. I don't think that's 100% the message that he's trying to send by making this comment, but he is acknowledging the fact that, yeah, players haven't really been coming to Detroit these days, and the only ones that have been have happened to have been hometown Detroit, Michigan guys. And now it's an issue. The Red Wings have never been able to bolster their team to a tremendous capacity over the years through free agency, and when you think about Steve Yzerman being at the helm of the team that people don't want to go to, that does become somewhat of a talking point that I think is fair to bring up after all this time. Larkin is potentially Exhibit A in the problem you're trying to diagnose here. You have a captain who has bled red his whole career and he wants out. Why? No, really, why? Whose responsibility is it that players don't want to come to Detroit? At some point, you have to look inside. Now, we all know that Steve Yzerman is no longer with the Red Wings. We'll talk a little bit more about him in this Reddit post, but let's continue on with some of the other Friedman comments. Friedman said this regarding the Red Wings management search. They have started to interview candidates, and they probably did start with internal candidates if Friedman's assumption is correct here. Friedman also said this, I think they interviewed Andrew Thomas, a guy who used to work for the Minnesota Wild. He works for the Tigers now, too. I don't know if Andrew Thomas is going to be ready for this now, but I've heard that they think very highly of him. That's a name to remember, although I don't think the opportunity is going to be now. We'll see whether or not the Red Wings keep coming back to that well of Detroit Tigers executives and people on the baseball side of things. But there also was this update as well. Friedman on the Red Wings GM search says Jeff Greenberg is a name to keep an eye on. He has worked with the Cubs in their baseball operations and then worked for the Blackhawks as their associate GM and currently is in the GM role for the Detroit Tigers. Mansa says he is part of the Ilitch bubble and therefore an automatic no. He is a yes man. He tells Ilitch what he wants to hear. That's why the Tigers are always on the cusp, but never successful. We need an outsider to come in and change the current culture while also having full autonomy. NHL Watcher asks, any chance he sells soon? He is 87. Are his children involved with the teams, if he has any? I have no answers to any of your questions, but they are all good questions. His dad was a diehard fan that wanted everything Detroit to be successful. This guy seems to want everything Detroit to pay him. Now, that is an external discussion. I'm just reading stuff here on Twitter, but really, if the Red Wings keep going into the Ilitch bubble to get guys, you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below whether or not that is a positive or a negative. Speaking about negatives, let's continue our conversation on Steve Yzerman and read this post by Curdled Magism on the Detroit Red Wings subreddit. It goes out there and asks a pretty particular question about Elliotte Friedman's 32 Thoughts podcast and the way Friedge talks about Stevie Y. Take a look at this. 32 Thoughts Podcast has a segment on Yzerman and the Red Wings. Is it me? Or does Friedman really go out of his way? Like, really make sure it's clear that Yzerman was thought of as, perhaps, a sarcastic a-hole in the way that he treated people? He says exactly Yzerman was elite at being sarcastic and biting. They had their battles, they had their fights. Yzerman made him better at his job. Am I reading too much into this? Like, it felt to me like Friedman was dancing on his grave a little. Politely, but still. Now, obviously, what we're doing here on this video, we're just reading the tweets. We're just reading the transcript of what Friedman said. We're just reading this Reddit post. The tone and the way in which Friedman verbally communicates these things on the podcast is up for you to decide. So I'm going to leave a link in the description to the newest 32 Thoughts podcast episode if you want to listen to Friedman talk about Yzerman, about the Red Wings. It's the new surprise episode. It's here on Apple Podcasts. You can listen and you can get into the nitty-gritty details on tone and whether or not you feel Friedman was dancing on Yzerman's grave like this user does. But the top comment says, I just listened and yeah, you really went out of your way to read into this that Friedge was dancing on his grave. We all know how prickly and sarcastic Yzerman is. Friedman made it clear that he had been on the receiving end of that quite a bit, but also said it made him a better person at his job. The biggest takeaway is that he said Ilitch wants Detroit to be a destination again. I'm guessing being a losing team and being very prickly didn't exactly win too many people over throughout the years. Yzerman's biggest downfall was not establishing a balanced team in the front office, in my opinion. A reply says this was the key. In Tampa Bay, he had great people around him. In Detroit, he had Draper and family and friends not hired for their experience or skill. It was costly. Also, why they needed to clean house and hire the best and brightest external candidates. Steve Yzerman, being the guy that he is, obviously we understand that he has somewhat of an attitude when it comes to dealing with him and negotiating and having a staff that is forced to keep everything tight to the chest. That's fine. You can have your personalities in hockey, but when you think about the team being as bad or as mid or as unsuccessful as they were, having a GM that was difficult to deal with on top of that makes it a lot more difficult to just bring everything together and progress the right way. Again, having Yzerman, the GM, and Larkin, the captain, not on speaking terms for months is a terrible sign for a professionally ran sports team. And now, seeing that this seems to be one of the main objectives for Ilitch and the Red Wings, they want to be a destination again, and they understand that Yzerman, as legendary as he is, might have been somewhat of an obstacle to that. It does make a lot more sense when you look at the way it's being analyzed if you look at it through that lens. Now, just for good measure, there's another reply over here. Wolverine237 says, I don't get the sense that Yzerman is well liked by contemporary players or agents, in much the same way as Pat Verbeek. I don't think his style was suited to the NHL of the 2020s, and I think comments like this reflect what Friedge hears from those guys. A reply asks, I understand that there is no place for the Babcocks of this world in today's league, but has anyone actually come up with a solid example of why Yzerman isn't suited for these guys, other than he doesn't give them exactly what they want? Everyone has struggles or challenges, and these players have basically lived 100% charmed lives on and off the ice. I think it's actually irresponsible for any grown or mature adult to expect the vast majority of them to behave like professionals or actually rise to meet adversity. Okay, that's actually a pretty good question, honestly. Like, I think it's a reasonable thing to ask, but I'm gonna be real, we're kind of running out of time here in this video, so I'll leave you with this here to end off this commentary. Was Steve Yzerman a problem? Do you buy into the idea that his presence and his personality may have been an obstacle in bringing people over to Detroit? And what are your thoughts on Elliotte Friedman's updates on the names that are being tossed out there in the GM search and the status of the search in general? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I hope you enjoyed this Roll 9, and bye.